Tell us a little bit about how you met Gary. How did this all come about? Like, how?
Well, the director, G.B. Shannon, him and I go way back. We make comedy films together, and he went on to make a documentary, and he's, comedy fanatic, big, Letterman fan, loved late night television. So he remembered this guy that was on Tonight shows a lot, and it's like, whatever happened to that guy, Gary? Like, tracked him down, kind of cold called him, just like, hey, do you want a documentary made? And Gary's like, let's do it. So that was the easiest thing of all. And then, from there it just steamrolled, because then it was like, well, let's get a couple people that you worked with, and everybody just came on board for Gary, and it was Jay Leno, Steve Martin, Conan O'Brien, so many people that once they heard about this, they wanted to be a part of it.
Not only was the reception must have been good, but to time this out, this must have took a long time to get all these interviews. There's so many wonderful interviews in this. It's been pretty incredible.
Yeah. We're talking span of years it took to get things, and a lot of people wouldn't be available at first if they wanted to, and then we were still years later down the line still working on it, and they're like, "Are you available now?" Like, "Yeah, I am. Come on over." And so even out of festival networking, Bart got to drive around Chris Elliott at the Indie Memphis Film Festival.
Yeah.
His daughter had a film in there, so the whole family was there, and so that was at the end of the festival, the big ask of hey, can you put me in touch with Letterman? And Chris was like, I'll make a call, and so Letterman immediately was on board for that too. So it all just kind of really fell into place, and once people heard Gary's name, we were expecting I don't know what to say about it. I'll pass, but everybody wanted to be a part of it. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it seems very serendipitous, just all the people out of the woodworks to come out. As far as getting to knowing that he's seen so many different types of comedy, different types of styles, different things, he's been a part of all the little scenes. Was it fun knowing y'all's background to dive into the lore of, kind of all the different forms of specifically, late night humor? We get to see all the different aspects just by kind of following a little bit of what he was connected to. It's really fascinating to connect the history lines.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we both love our history of comedy. Bart, a little older, has, but, for a while there, it was the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and that was the only way you really got to become a known comic. And from there, you got to have your own sitcom. You had to have your own shows. You got to be a writer. But then the comedy boom, cable comes about, VHS comes about, and then stand-up becomes a huge prolific thing. And that was a part when I kind of grew up in. I remember watching a lot of, evening at the Improv and things like that. And so seeing the history of comedy like that, there's a lot of documentary of that as well in the film, beyond just, you have to talk about the history of comedy to talk about the history of Gary. So that became a really fascinating point. And even Cliff Nesteroff, who's kind of the historian of comedy, is in the film and gets to kind of take us through the journey of the club starting out, and Gary was one of the first performers at the Comedy Store, and so and then talk about the Improv and Robin Williams and all the legends coming up through there, and so that's a fun little bit history trip to take through the film as well.
Going through this footage is different than most footage because it's really freaking funny. There's a lot of gold in there. How much fun was it to actually just dive back and pick the different elements? There's a lot of footage I'm guessing you guys had to get through to pull in on top of all the great interviews.
Yeah, it's almost, you had to take the fun out of it for a while, because you just sort of transcriptions of stand-up, and then you realize, Gary said this joke 18 years ago. Which one do you want to use? The one, 30-year-old Gary or 50-year-old Gary? Which one's doing this one? But you have to really kind of keep a really organized inventory of the jokes, and then see where they work and what era they work in. And so, it becomes an act of memorization to kind of you switch one joke out somewhere in the film, you gotta have three substitutes for it somewhere. And Gary also has a history of very like shaggy dog story jokes, where it's well, this joke's 4 minutes long. Do you want to take the time for it? It has a great payoff at the end, but you gotta decide whether the 30-second joke is the better one or not.
It's wild. Is there a specific joke that you love more than all the others, one that stands up to you personally? Maybe a joke, maybe a moment even from his life.
Favorite moment, I would have to say, was initially like meeting David Letterman. So Letterman just moved from Indiana, didn't know anybody in LA, was hanging out at the Comedy Store, and Gary was already kind of an established regular there. And so Letterman was a little bit impressed, like, well, this is that guy that's on TV, Gary. And it's like, could we write jokes sometime together? And Gary is like, sure, let me give you my card. And it's the business card would say like Larry Johnson, salesman at Nissan Datsun, and all that's crossed out and Gary's name's written in with his phone number. So why pay for your own business cards when you can just do a little editing, a little photoshopping? And so like that Letterman shares that story with fondness about how he first met Gary and how he got his contact.
It's amazing. You mentioned this being years in the making. Now being able to show it to audiences, I know we're along on the festival circuit, but how much payoff has this been? What has the reactions been for you? Like, you literally just drove up from one of them. I'm curious, like, getting people's response to the work and giving Gary's story, the full story out there. What have you felt back? Yeah,
I mean, of course, it's kind of measured in laughter, and having being back in the theaters with a full room of people is wonderful, and hear a room full of laughter. I know that I watch comedies a little differently at home by myself versus when you're in the room, and it gets a little contagious to laugh at things. So it's been so wonderful to hear the laughter reverberate in the walls, and that's happened here. So we're so happy about that. And then, reaction has been wonderful so far, and it has its ups and downs. It has a good journey through his life, but it's a documentary, and the subject of documentary should always be respected, and when it's an entertainer, you keep it entertaining and keep them laughing. And I think that's what helps really make this special film, is that it really makes you laugh more than you thought you would for a documentary.
Can we talk about the title, and was it always the title, and is there any story behind the title?
Yeah, so this is from memory, I think correctly, but there was a few titles floating around, but this one kind of came in. Gary was a regular on Hollywood Squares, and there's one episode he just never got called on. And so the host goes like, Gary, what's the deal? And Gary, with his sharp wit, he just immediately like, show business is my life, but I can't prove it. And that kind of stuck as a little calling card that he had wonderful in-between jokes, little quips like that, where he loved kind of when a joke didn't land, because it gave him a setup to really, go and be poignantly, commentating on that didn't work. So a couple of stand-up acts, you'd hear, show business is my life, but I can't prove it. That usually followed a joke that was kind of quiet, and that one would then kill. So,
is the wit as a parent did he always have that wit? Is it always something that's been his trademark? Can you talk about being around someone that has that? It's charismatic.
Totally, yes. I think he did always have that. He was always being lured to be in someone's writer's room, but he didn't flourish in a writer's room. He flourished on the road and on the stage with an audience. So, he chose his paths in life, and it's why maybe you haven't heard about Gary Mule Deer, because he found home in being an opening act in Vegas more than when his peers were having their own late night talk shows and stuff at the same time. But he still is, and he's still on the road, 80 something years old, I'll say, and just as sharp as ever. And it's amazing seeing somebody at that age still doing what they love, and still feeling that call for being on the road and working your craft.
What's his response been to the film?
He's been very. He's. I think it's kind of hitting him. We went to a couple festivals all together, and to see him, see a crowd react to that, and like, he probably never thought that something like this would happen. Why would Steve Martin's getting his own documentary, but it's not. Gary got his first in a way, and they're old roommates together, so that's kind of an interesting thing. But you can see it kind of is profound on him to see a whole new crowd of people find him, and then start going through and reliving his comedy with there, and then seeing all his peers over 60 years that came in board to say, Gary's amazing, and it's been an honor to have him in my life. And even beyond comedy, Alice Cooper's in the film and speaks celebrity golf tournaments now. Just imagine Alice Cooper there, but and then Johnny Mathis, who he's still touring with too, and Johnny's still out there, just wowing the crowds, and so it's just amazing to see this broad spectrum of entertainers. Vince Gill and Amy Grant just speak so fondly and say, like, when Gary's in the room, man, he just slays. He's amazing at it.
Can you talk about being able to cross lines like that? Like with the humor, it's universally accepted. It's not something that's niche or maybe even for a certain culture or style or people. Like, I feel like that humor, that's maybe the test of time. It is about his response to something normally, and that quick wit is just, everyone can kind of enjoy it. It does cross spectrums. It's kind of fascinating. Yeah,
Gary spoke to that a little bit. He has some really good universal comedy, and he started doing cruise liners, and families, young and old, both were laughing, and that made him realize he was kind of doing something special, and he could make multiple generations laugh. And Universal Joke can do that. He had a lot of jokes where it was talking about some politician in 1973, and I was like, I don't know who that is. And then you kind of see, like, 1986, there's the same joke, but the politician switched out. But there's still that that joke still lands at the time, and then like by today it's like, we don't know who any of those people are, Gary. But the weekend news update, wonderful, thank you. But for his other jokes, they're timeless, and he was a godfather of prop comedy, as Carrot Top in the film mentions, and that found its place. For a while there, that was a not respected genre, but he really kind of stood the test of time, and his comedy's still working.
That's amazing. Switching to your other project that's at the festival, I kind of want to ask, how do things fall into your lap? How do you go searching for things, like you personally for your project? How do you come across some of the gold you've been able to cover and be a part of?
I don't know, and it really worries me sometimes because it just always ends up being. But just having a good network of coming up with people, and you find where your strengths are, and I do a little bit of everything, but I do have a passion of editing, and it's a very difficult thing because a lot of indie filmmakers are taking multiple roles, and it's hard to let go of certain responsibilities, I know. And so when you find an editor that you kind of trust is like trying to cut something in your best interest of the story and not just for their own demo reels or anything like that, I think that's a thing. It's just establishing those relationships with people, that knowing that I could give a truthful and accurate kind of take on their stories, and making sure that we have an efficient and well-told story at the end.
Is your process the same for something like the feature compared to a music video? I mean, or is it different?
A little different. I mean, I think in this too, with a very commercial sense, like, what is somebody who's just flipping through the channels going to stick and watch, versus music videos are a bit of a vacation from that. And when I get to make a music video, I get to have a bit of an artistic expression and be like, there is no mistake in a music video because it's an artistic choice, and you can go off into way left field with it if you want. But documentary, you've got to stay within what is a documentary. You got to keep a storyline flowing, and you can get creative in how you tell things, but you still have a very A to B kind of path you have to take.
Do you have to be a fan of the story you're telling? Or how much of that influences maybe wanting to do a story?
That's a good question, if you need to be a fan, because sometimes being a fan can get in the way of what you love. And I know we had that too, where we had kind of some chapters of Gary's life where this is so important to Gary and this is something so needed, but honestly it was making it was a little too much stuffing in the movie then. And so, to make, for an editor, it's what's got to be cut, and you got to make the hard choices with your director and all the work that went into something, and it's like, well, that just doesn't need to be in there. So sometimes I think being a fan keeps you energized to keep seeing something through, but then also being critical in a way, like wanting to get done with it. You kind of get an eye of what is going to be the best end product more so.
With the documentary, speaking of the cut and how long, are you thinking towards maybe not distribution, but getting onto other platforms, being able to hit an hour line for this or hit a 30-minute line for that? Is that play? I mean, I know that must be on your mind all the time for things like this.
Yeah, well, it does. I mean, this will be on streaming pretty soon.
Yeah.
And of course you do want to keep things pretty tight for that. But also, yeah, it's a weird time right now because sometimes now, like if you have an hour and a half, you get teased with the idea like, well, what about a docuseries? What if you stretched that out and had 5 30-minute episodes? And then you watch some things like that and you realize, no, they had an hour and a half documentary. I've really wasted 2 episodes here kind of in the middle. So deciding the platform on which you're editing at now in is wide open, but it's good to know when, leave them wanting more is the old saying. That's very important to know, I think, in this, to know when is best to cut off the runtime.
So I'm sure you've probably got a lot of projects, but I know there's still life for these as well, these 2 projects in particular. But is there anything you can share with us that's down the line, anything that you've got coming up that you really want to tackle?
Very early on stuff for the works. I'm still doing some more music videos coming up, so that's going to be. I'm in the weird music video mindset right now of just what's artistically visual for music. I would love. This is my first documentary feature I edited, so I really loved it. I think it was a great break from narrative where you could watch 50 takes of the same line and try and find a nuance at which one worked and which one didn't, but also at a technical, there was this water bottle on the table for the best take. Documentary lets you get away with a little bit more of that and there's only, the truth's the truth, but also people are saying it from their best memory in the 70s when a lot of chemicals were going around. So the truth is told in one shape or form, and you get to have interpretation, which is amazing. But I fell in love with documentary, and then also having a comedy background. I have a lot of comedy shorts that I've made. It was just wonderful to have something that was very fun and entertaining to make for people.
Very cool. Well, Edward, it was fun to watch it. It was fun to laugh. I didn't get the theater experience, which now I'm wanting to see this in the big screen because I was laughing by myself. So I'd love to feel the whole audience and getting Gary's story. And then the music video is vibrant. It's colorful. It's wonderful. So thank you for the time. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.